Hey gamers, this is Matt again, and I am super excited because I get to introduce you to someone named Blake Boles, someone who has actually influenced our lives in the Barnes household in ways that he may not even realize. Although he now has gotten connected to my daughter a little bit, knows how much my daughter has used his writings to shape how she's learning. And so, welcome Blake Boles to the Education Game podcast.
Thank you, Matt. Great to be here.
Yeah, yeah. And so off air, Blake and I were just talking a little bit about his life and how he's not like a digital nomad, but he's close because he can do work from wherever he wants, and he loves to travel. And so we'll get into some of that a little bit today. But before that, I want to start with the question that I ask of a lot of folks, Blake, which is. I want to understand your origin story. And again, a reminder that I'm talking to parents on this show. And so parents, I want you all to listen to who this guy is and his background and start to get a piece together what your child's life might look like one day, because I think he's actually on the cutting edge of what will become normal in the future years. Blake, can you give me your origin story a little bit?
Sure. I went to California public schools, didn't have an alternative upbringing of any sort. I was into math and science, and I thought I wanted to become a research scientist. And so I studied hard. I got good grades. I got into Berkeley, and I studied something that sounded very impressive to myself and others, which was astrophysics. And that was great and ego stroking. And it's like, yes, you're the winner in this game. Until about 2 years into it, I realized that I didn't actually want to be a research scientist. I saw the life of grad students and I said, that's not what I want to be doing. I want to be out in the sun throwing a frisbee.
Right.
And also, I took linear algebra and quantum mechanics, and I was like, oh, this is actually very, very difficult. And I am no longer on the top of this pile anymore.
Right.
So I was thinking about maybe becoming a high school science teacher. And then someone handed me a book by John Taylor Gatto, the New York City public school teacher who won all these awards. And then he quit teaching because he said, I don't want to make a living hurting kids anymore.
Let me just pause you right there, dude. So a lot of parents may not have ever heard of John Gatto. But
Okay.
for parents who are out there, he was like the father of what in the world are we doing with traditional learning? It just doesn't make any sense. So he's the one that inspired you, huh?
Yeah, I read his book called A Different Kind of Teacher,
Yeah.
which is not his most popular book. His most popular one is Dumbing Us Down, which is also a good book.
Yep.
And I just devoured this thing. It was like an intellectual revelation. I had to keep learning about this stuff. And so I ended up going on to Amazon and just, people who bought John Taylor Gatto also bought, and I started clicking.
Oh, right.
And I started reading about democratic free schools and unschooling and all of the kind of critical educators of the 60s and 70s, and just read very, very widely. And within a few months discovered I need to study this stuff full time. So I finagled my way into a design your own major program at Berkeley and literally titled my own undergraduate degree, Alternative Schooling and Science Education. The science education part was kind of a sham. I didn't study how to teach science. We just had to justify my 2 years of science.
You had to make it look
that
good.
I already had. Yeah, I didn't want to start over from scratch.
Yeah.
So I had a very self-directed second half of college. And yeah, then I went into the working world. I did some outdoor education work, which is essentially getting paid to take kids hiking and say, like, that's an acorn, that's a deer. And that was fine for a little while. But eventually I knew that I really wanted to be working with teenagers in a sort of summer camp type environment, but longer than a summer camp. And so that's what led me to start my company, Unschool Adventures, and getting to hang out with teenage unschoolers while taking them on international trips was a very handy way to learn about their lives. And that led me to write my books about what it's like to be an unschooler or otherwise a very self-directed learner, especially in the teenage years.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really cool. So what you just described, again, is this journey, this non-linear journey from what you thought you were interested in until you actually saw what that meant, right? I'll just tell you, Blake, I've got a son who is going to school university next year. He wants to study physics. And despite my constant encouragement, he has no understanding what that actually means, right? So I at some point as a parent, I'm like, all right, dude, you're gonna have to roll with your game, right? My guess is at some point he will likely go, wait, this is not what I signed up for, right? And then you begin this journey, and so you have now. By the way, did you read the book Designing Your Life?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, that's one you may want to pick up. It's by Stanford University Design School. Sorry, I know that
Oh, the D
Berkeley and
School. Those are good people.
yeah, I know Berkeley and
Yeah.
Stanford, they don't talk to each other or something, but so what Blake has done is he's designed a life that allows him to travel, that allows him to live a life that I think maybe he probably dreamed about, right? But it also gave Blake enough information to know the things he likes and the things he doesn't like, so he can avoid the things he doesn't like and lean into the things he does like. That is a pretty successful adult life in my view. So Blake, continue on. I stumbled upon your book, your first book,
College Without High School.
College Without High School. Thank you. And again, that was back in 2009, maybe 2000.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a bit dated, but the principles in there are entirely consistent with today. So tell me a little bit about that one, and then we'll go through a couple of the other books, including your most recent one that we'll get to in a moment.
Sure. Just to jump ahead for a moment, I reviewed all of the research that I did for that first book when I wrote my most recent book in 2000. So 10 years later.
Yeah.
And like you said, all of the same ideas about how you get into college if you don't have a traditional school upbringing. Yeah, they're the same. It really hasn't changed. And so that's a pleasant realization.
It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed in 40 years, actually. So it's yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
All right.
So I got involved with this community of unschoolers called Not Back to School Camp, which is like the summer camp for teenage unschoolers. It's a very cool place.
Interesting.
And so this was right after I finished college. And
hey, Blake,
this was my first.
I'm sorry, but I need to interrupt you because some of the parents that might be listening to you, they don't know what unschooling is. Can you give a quick,
Allow me.
Please.
Allow me. So unschooling is just about taking advantage of existing homeschooling laws, but not just trying to replicate school at home. It's about kind of maximizing the self-directed element. And no matter which state you're in the United States, and also in some other countries around the world, you can use homeschooling laws to do very fun, creative, flexible things and not just replicate the school system.
Yeah.
So,
okay, back to college.
Not back to school camp.
Oh,
yes.
Back to school camp, yes.
So I got involved with this summer camp community, and until this point, I had only read about all of these kind of self-educated, self-directed young people from a very academic perspective. And so getting to actually meet them was a big eye-opener for me.
And what's different about those kids?
Well, in some ways, there's nothing different about them. They are, I think, pretty typical of let's say, the same socioeconomic background. If you just kind of, compared them to the other kids in the same area, same income bracket that's growing up, they're not that different. They're not like super outliers. They're not, total weirdos. They're not unsocialized. I think that the whole socialization question is a fun one because, in some ways, yes, the critics are right. It's like if you take an average sample of homeschoolers and compare them to an average sample of kids at school, you will probably see a bit less socialization in the homeschoolers. But then you have to ask, it's the chicken or the egg, right? Yeah. Are they less socialized? We can talk about what that even means and if it's important because they were homeschooled, or are they homeschooled because kind of the person who they are is just like a little bit different and not a good fit for this monolithic school system. And therefore it's an act of charity and kindness to homeschool this
to give them the space to be themselves, right?
Exactly.
So let's talk for a minute. And Blake, I know I'm all over the place here, but like I said, we're having a cup of coffee.
We'll find our way again, I'm sure.
That's right. I was on a call yesterday with a woman, a podcaster from United Kingdom. And she, her first question was, well, what about socialization? Now, you touched on it a little bit. Help me. So here's how I answer that question. I want to get your thoughts on it. So I said, socialization that you learn in schools is a double-edged sword. One, you learn how to interact with kids who are the same age as yourself, right? But you don't learn how to interact with everyone else in the world, whether they be older or younger. You don't get the opportunity to practice interacting and talking about things that older people talk about, et cetera. So that was the first piece. And then the second one was, in school, you actually learn a lot of negative social stuff too.
Yeah.
And I don't think we tend to think about that, but it's exactly what you're describing in terms of narrowing your vision of what your life could be because you have to conform to your social context. So is that how you imagine, or how you see some of the kids in this? What did you call it? The unschooled, not back to school
Yeah.
camp. These are kids that are freer to become who they may have actually been.
Well, let me go back and first agree with you on the double-edged sword
Yeah.
analogy. And actually, I love the title of your show, The Education Game, because I think that that's the kind of socialization that's happening in school. You're learning how to play a very specific kind of game.
Yes.
And you're learning how to compete and win in that game, and
right.
often win at any cost.
That's right.
And so that's where what I consider the negative socialization to come in. It can lead to these very tribal and vicious kind of manifestations of behavior. I think bullying exists kind of in any community you can find, but I think it's the environment of school exacerbates bullying. It just brings it up to this whole other level.
Were you bullied?
The schoolyard politics, a little bit.
Yeah, I was.
Like I don't think enough to like be traumatized by it, but I definitely was not immune to it.
Well, and I'll say that I can't think of many kids I know who weren't, and the kids. And in every case, they had to shape themselves. They had to kind of change who they were in order to fit the mold so they wouldn't be bullied as much or they could kind of stay under the radar. Anyway, that's another conversation.
And listen, I don't want to say that like all adversity is bad, right? There are different kinds of stress, and we want to promote the healthy kinds of stress and not the unhealthy and extreme kinds of stress. And so when people say, well, it's good for kids to get bullied a little bit, they have to learn how to survive in the world. It's like there is a certain truth to that, but I think that the default experience for most kids in school, it goes way overboard. And that's the negative socialization part.
Yeah.
It also teaches young people like not to look adults in the eye and treat them as real people because there's an automatic like authority structure there.
Us and them.
It makes them afraid.
Yeah.
Yes, it teaches them that learning is something to be, gamed and to be done with as quickly as possible.
Right.
It's all about performing to there's a book I love called The Case Against Education, which talks about the signaling that happens in all levels of education, but especially high school and college, and how really young people are taught to just go after the signal that will maximize their sort of economic potential, which is usually grades. Or other indicators of conventional success, which is very different from building up your self-knowledge, your awareness of kind of who you are, where you might fit in this world, how you'll contribute, kind of your personality. That's what these unschoolers, that's the work that they were doing. That's what I witnessed at the summer camp, and later on getting to work with self-directed young people in lots of different environments.
Got it. So then when you decided to write College Without High School, that was, and again, I read it and I was like, okay, kids, I'm going to let you choose a lot of things, but this is one thing you have to read.
Yeah,
that's just kind of
mandatory reading list.
Right. So you had not grown up this way, but you started interacting with these kids, and then you kind of drew up a map of how to get from middle school, really even before middle school, to a college of your choice. And so give me maybe the two key points. If you're a parent, what are the 2 points that you want them to take away from that book, or maybe entice them to buy the book, which I've been recommending, to help them kind of frame what that book is about and how they should think about it?
Sure. I think one key point is that getting into college with a non-traditional background is a lot more about results than it is about process. We assume that you have to go through the standard process of taking the normal curriculum, getting normal grades, doing the normal extracurriculars, SATs, we all know what this looks like.
Yep.
But in the end, if you can just prove a certain kind of list of key characteristics that colleges care about. And some of these are very traditional. It's like, you need to show a certain intellectual capacity. You need to have a certain, breadth of knowledge. You can show that you're going to be able to handle a number of different types of courses, assuming you're going into a traditional liberal arts undergraduate program. So yes, you still need to show very similar things to what regular high school students are doing, but there are such more interesting and engaging ways to go about proving those results.
And less time intensive.
Well, yeah. in a way that someone who's doing something that they love, the passing of time often doesn't feel like excruciating like it does in school. When you're being forced to take math at a certain pace, when you're being forced to go through a certain like science curriculum
Yes.
in a certain way, it's like, let's just like let kids do what they're really interested in doing. And you can extract the little kind of academic elements. You can frame it in the language of college prep. And yes, sometimes a kid is not going to naturally motivate themselves to do something which is non-negotiable for colleges. Like math is a classic thing that a lot of unschoolers will just not naturally kind of strong arm themselves into doing. Math is one of the things they're very happy to just say goodbye to when they stop going to regular school. And then when they need to take the SAT or they need to take some sort of other entrance exam, they need to show that they can do, for example, algebra and geometry. So they have to kind of get their butts in line and fill in those gaps. But you know what? When they're doing it on their own schedule, and when they see, this is the most crucial part, when the kid sees their own unique reason for needing to do this thing. It's like, I want to go to college to study computer programming because I love Fortnite so much. I want to be able to contribute to that world or build the next Fortnite. And in order to do that, I need to take algebra. Then all of a sudden, even if the kid is completely math phobic,
Yes.
it'll be like, okay, I have my reason for doing this math. And even if that's just, let's get this done as quickly as possible, like it changes everything. Then the parent and the teachers are no longer the enemies who are like strong arming the kid into doing this and like playing these horrible games and manipulating the kid and sticks and carrots. It's like, no, then you're on the same team as the kid. And you say, I want to help you do what you want to do. And yes, that means breaking this big goal down into all these little tiny steps. And some of these are going to be unsavory steps, but that's life. Welcome to life. You have arrived.
That's right. So let me pause you there because you said a lot in that. But the key part that I want to take away, and I'm going to tell you a quick story. The key part is once a child identifies a goal that they set, now the motivation starts to spike. And you'd never need to strong arm a kid or browbeat them or reward them or punish them if they are pursuing something that is in their wheelhouse. And that's the real trick here. If we can figure out how to help a kid find the things they're passionate about, now the parent can actually step away and watch and coach. And that's exactly what you're describing. Let me tell you a quick story real quick about my son. So we for years tried to strong arm him into playing piano, right? It didn't work. Like we decided not that battle wasn't worth fighting, right? But when COVID hit, now he's in a traditional high school. When COVID hit, he started just first dinking around on the piano, just a few minutes a day. Now this kid is playing 2 hours a day on the piano. He's composing music. He is finding songs that he likes, that he hears, and he just figures out how to play them. It is like nothing I've ever seen. And like the question I ask parents or myself, my wife, I say, well, what would it have taken for us to get him to practice 2 hours a day? How much emotional trauma would we have to inflict in order for that to happen? It's significant, right? It's the whole Tiger Mom
I was about to say Tiger Mom.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So the first part of what you would say to a parent is this question of helping the child find something that they're passionate about. And once they find it, now they're off to the races on their own. What's a second strategy or concept from your first book that you would want parents to hear that can help them kind of move a little bit closer?
Well, Matt, I'm going to try to answer this in a slightly different way than you're asking. Okay. I think that we've actually hit the two main concepts, which is one, results over process. And then the second thing is just help them follow their interests and the natural motivation will appear. I mean, really, that's the basis of the book. But just to answer this question a bit differently, this bridges into what I wrote my second book about, which is about choosing not to go to college. And because there are some unschoolers that this is a big concern for parents. They think if I let my kids step off the treadmill, then they're just going to leave formal education, never look back, and then they'll never be able to get back on the wagon if they decide they want to.
Right.
And
that's a significant concern. Yes,
it is. And that's why I wrote the first book and centered it around the question of how do you go to college? Because that is our culturally accepted and an economically validated way to become a successful adult
Yep.
in this world. There are exceptions, and the exceptions are what I wrote about in the second book, which is Better Than College.
Yep.
And so I just want to say that you can go either direction. I felt like it was important to start with the more mainstream direction. And also, for me to be true to myself, I had a very life-changing and positive experience in college. And it would not be fair for me to just say structured education, all formal education is bad. No, I would be a hypocrite to say that. But there are definitely some young people, whether they are alternatively educated or not, who do a very good job of thriving outside of formal higher education. I'm not going to waste anyone's time by talking about the classic tech savant examples.
Yeah.
There are many more people who don't achieve such fame, who I think whose lives are better off for not going to college. And often, if that means that they did not take on an onerous amount of student debt
Bingo.
in the process, then they have kept their options way more open. As a 22-year-old who does not have any debt, but has accumulated some work experience, has some sort of resume, has been trying to figure out their passions, I would much rather be in that situation and have a good relationship with my parents, because my parents have been on my team,
Yes,
than be the 22-year-old who was forced into college, has no idea why they're there, just did some major to please their parents and society at large, and took on a bunch of debt. And now you're 22 years old. You've got $50,000 in debt. You got to start paying off within 6 months. And good luck to you.
that's right. That's right. So I want to pause. You mentioned parents being on your team. A lot of this, Blake, I think I heard it when reading your books, is this question about how we define success. And if success is defined by college or career or just those kind of narrow bands, then it creates a natural conflict where the parent is saying, I want you to be successful, and the child not clear for themselves what success actually means. And so, yes, it does create these. And again, the Tiger Mom strategy, I would say it worked for a period of time. You strong arm a child to do all the things, to check all the boxes, and they get to college and they go on and have their quote unquote happy life. Now, though, go ahead.
I just want to play devil's advocate here. I think that approach still does work in many ways, Matt, in the sense that if you can vault a kid through whatever means necessary into the upper echelons of the elite education system, it does provide a certain network of opportunities.
Sure does.
It opens up certain doors. You want to go work at McKinsey, you want to become president of the United States, make sure you go to Yale or Harvard Law, right?
That's right.
And so there is a certain truth to that. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here, but I feel like I'm probably going to agree with what you're about to say.
Well, I'm not even sure what I was going to say now. It's kind of lost my train of thought there.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying like the Tiger Mom approach did work for a while.
Yes.
Yes.
But the world has shifted on us. And what I'm saying now is that the likelihood of moving into a job and staying in a career for any length of time is virtually zero now. That you're going to be moving not only careers but industries multiple times, and a person's ability to learn is really the key currency. To learn quickly, to learn anything, to have the confidence they need to learn. And confidence doesn't come from being strong-armed into doing something. In fact, very much the opposite that can actually occur. Confidence comes from doing something, realizing that you're able to do it, and then repeating it over and over and over again. So there's something there to me that's pretty important. So Better Than College was the second part. Is that your second book, correct? Or is that your third?
Yeah.
The second book, okay. And so that book talked about life outside of the college structure, yes? Now,
Correct.
again, to your point, parents are like, well, no, my child's going to college. And again, what's happened in this world of work, and I share this all the time, but there are lots of companies that are saying we don't actually need a college degree anymore. You just have to demonstrate skills. Now, again, not to suggest that a college degree is not important. It is. At the same time, there are lots of pathways into a life of stability. That's the key point I'm trying to make. So, going on to your next book. Art of Self-Directed
There's so
Learning. Was
much I
that the
want
next?
to talk about with you. Yeah, the third book was my attempt to write like a shorter, more illustrated, more playful book, and that
Mhm.
was called The Art of Self-Directed Learning. It was stories from my life working with unschoolers on my trips and my programs, and also kind of interesting profiles that I found out there in the world.
Yeah.
And so that's a short, fun book. It's a good like book for someone who considers themselves a non-reader,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
it's like the chapters are two very small pages.
Right. Now, does self-directed mean that if the child likes to play video games, that's what they do all day? What does that mean?
Ooh,
Like,
I tackle video games in a big way in my most recent book.
really?
Why are you still sending your kids to school? And I would, in general, I stand up for video games,
Uh huh.
and I stand up for what others would probably consider an unreasonable amount of permitted gaming time.
So talk to me more
I'm
about that because this comes up.
Yeah,
This comes up probably for every conversation I have with a
yeah,
parent of a boy. The parent in the UK I talked to yesterday.
yeah.
This issue came up. So let me hear what you would say to that mom whose son seems like if you gave him the freedom, he would play video
Yeah.
games all day long, every day.
Well, let me build a little foundation here. So I've hung out with a lot of unschoolers
Mm-hmm.
who are generally families who combined a little bit of parent kind of required stuff like, okay, you got to do math, but then you can still do like anything else you want. It still feels
Yes.
like a crazy amount of freedom to most parents. But I've also hung out and been around radical unschoolers, which
Mm.
is this kind of subdomain where the principles of kind of giving a kid choice are taken to their maximum extent and often applied into other realms outside of education. So, for example, bedtimes, screen time, food,
Yeah.
chores,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And so I actually know a number of young people who are now in their 20s or 30s who were raised in the radical unschooling environment and who came out just fine. And
Yeah.
these were ones who did spend incredible hours, 12 hours a day sometimes, playing video games. And they did not turn out to be complete failure to launch, just like,
Right.
they're 33 in their
In the
parents'
basement.
basement,
Right. Right.
wiping the flaming hot Cheeto dust off of the t-shirt. It's like, no, you really can let a kid indulge, let's choose our words carefully here. We can say interests, we can say passions, hobbies, or obsessions. And I feel
Mm.
like there's really a thin line between all of these things. And for me personally, as a young person, especially as a teenager, I needed the chance to become obsessed with things for a while. I essentially needed to get things out of my system. I would become
Mm.
extremely captivated by something, want to know everything about it, go deep into it. And I did this with video games and computer games and Magic the Gathering and also skateboarding and snowboarding. I, had a kind of a diverse portfolio of things I was into.
Yeah.
It wasn't all games. But when I was deep into those games, especially I was growing up in the 90s when kind of the really good networked computer games were first coming onto the scene.
Halo, was that one of them?
Well, no, I was Quake,
Oh, okay.
way before. But the
Gotcha.
precursors to what we have now in terms of Fortnite, Minecraft, The Sims, I was playing the same types of games. And these games were fascinating. They were complex worlds. This was not playing Pac-Man. This was like you were going into something really, really deep and complicated and challenging. And especially with the multiplayer games, you had to act together with other people. You're not just, when I was very young, I played Legend of Zelda, and you're just sitting in front of the Nintendo Entertainment System playing a game by yourself. That's challenging in a certain way, but it's not social.
Yes.
You'll notice that the games that kids go craziest for nowadays are these complicated social games that are difficult. And that's the most important thing. You need to watch your kid when they are voluntarily throwing themselves at difficult problems over and over again, because that is the transferable life skill that you want to nurture in them. And oftentimes that is what is happening with games.
Mm.
My most recent book, really relies a lot on another book called Reality is Broken by the game designer Jane McGonigal.
Mm.
And she brought up a number of really interesting observations for me, which I relay in my book. One of them is when a kid wins a quest, defeats a boss in World of Warcraft,
Yeah.
the reward is not the end of the game. The reward is playing another more challenging level
Right.
of the game.
Right.
That is a good thing. And so my argument is, no, not necessarily let kids play all the games they want forever and ever. Like, there are addictive qualities to these games. There are limits that reasonable people can set. But if you see a kid obsessed with something that is really challenging and they just keep wanting to throw themselves at this challenge, especially when the game is social, let them do it. Let them get that bug out of their system, because they are learning and growing when they're doing it. And engagement is the key metric.
That's right. So one of the things I recommend to parents is to try to understand more about what it is that that kid really, really likes about that game, because it's more than just playing, the video game. It's actually
Candy Crush.
Yeah, yeah. But there's a social element of most of those games, as you mentioned, that they love being a part of a team. They love, having these constant challenges. They love seeing their skills grow, right? Those are things that you want to try to unpack from the child so that they can have a similar recognition of the same dynamics later on in life. When they're seeing their skills grow, when they're seeing they're part of a team and the team's doing something really challenging, that can be in any context. Okay. Go on. We could do this all day, by the way.
I know. I just want to throw one more thing on top of what you said. I'd feel remiss if I didn't. Yeah. And so also what kids get out of games is a sense of control. And that in psychology, like, that's such an important thing for overall well-being for people. Yeah. And if we just look at how the school as an institution has grown over the past 50 years, like, it's become a very all-pervasive type of activity. It fills in more and more hours. It follows kids into the home. And so there are few places, even in sports teams, often, parents are so involved in that. There are a few places where kids can feel a genuine sense of control over their lives, where they can have their own community. And that's what games often fulfill.
Yeah,
and so there's a bit of a catch-22. You let your kid drop out of school, perhaps, if you're going full, whole hog unschooling here. You let your kid drop out of school, do whatever they want. There is a very good chance that they will go deep into something like games, because it makes them feel good. It gives them a sense of control. But on the other side of that, once they're no longer monopolized by school, there's less need to kind of, desperately grasp for those environments that give you just this little sense of control. And so it's a catch-22.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of this also is the context of the family as well. But, I would love to, maybe, because we're getting a little tight on time here, I'd love to talk a bit more about some of these specific topics at maybe some later date. Video games is one of the big ones. Really having some deep conversations about your recommendations, and me giving you some examples of parents I've spoken with. Maybe I'll just ask you straight up what you would do. But the last thing I want to do really is to make sure this last book the most recent one, Why Are You Still Sending Your Kids to School? Talk briefly about what's different about that book and who's that for and who should pick that book up.
This book is like the one ring to rule them all. The Lord of the Rings analogy.
Big Lord of the Rings fan.
So it has a lot of the content from the previous books, including how you get into college if you don't go to high school, good reasons to consider not going to college, kind of a general introduction to this idea of self-directed learning. But there was research that I was doing between essentially 2014 and 2018, which I could no longer ignore, and it really had to be integrated into this big picture. Some of that research was reading the parenting literature, kind of the history of parenting and the change in parenting philosophy and approach that has happened over the past, especially the past 30 years. Yeah. But broadly speaking, over the past 100 years.
Yep.
And as a non-parent myself, I've only had the chance to interact with a bunch of other people's kids, kind of like crowdsourcing this information. Right. And so filling in the sort of like scholarly gaps in my knowledge was an eye-opening thing, and getting to write in this new book about intensive parenting. And I think a very good approximation for intensive parenting is Tiger Mom parenting. And talking about the connection between that and parent-child relationships and the education system was a very important puzzle piece to add into that. The research about gaming and gaming as a proxy for letting kids become obsessed with things that they find challenging and interesting, even if parents, really struggle to wrap their head around why this is so important to the kid. That was another important part there. And finally, mental health is something that needs to be discussed because, again, more of my research showed there's this like steadily snowballing mental health crisis, especially among young people, middle school, high school, college age young people.
Yep. And
And
social media connections and
yeah, I don't dwell too much on that. I think that's a
okay.
very interesting question, but I don't yet feel like an authority on that subject.
Okay.
So the broader question of how do you promote just general positive mental health? How do you reduce anxiety and depression symptoms in young people, and how is that connected to school and school pressures, whether it comes from educators or from parents?
Yeah.
And so in the end, it's the best kind of collection of arguments that I can muster to convince a parent whose kid is not enjoying school, is
Yeah.
clearly being hurt by it in some way, large or small, to stop sending their kids to school, because this is not something that a kid can get, opt out of on their own. They need parental support, moral support, financial support, legal support in
That's
order to
right.
stop going to school. And so
Yeah.
this is my book for parents.
Well, so for the parents listening, what I am all about is upskilling parents, so parents can know exactly the options that are available to them. Again, a quote that I often use is, "If you have no options, then you cannot negotiate, and if you cannot negotiate, then you are a slave." And so,
Oh, I love
parents,
that.
yes, that's Jordan Peterson. And so, parents, when you don't know how many options are on the table, you are forced to choose a school that may not fit for you or your family. And so what Blake is talking about here in his books, I would recommend actually College Without High School for a framing, and this is what I've done in the past, for a framing of what it means to learn outside of a school context. And then this last book, which I'm actually not done with at this point, but it sounds like it's the book, again, the one book to rule them all kind of thing. I would encourage you to look at it, because if you're not building your skill set, then you are not going to be able to lead your child. And if you trust that someone else is going to lead your child, then you are putting your child at risk. And I think there's a ton of data out there to show that. That's what I'm trying to do, is introduce you to people like Blake who are looking at the world differently and who have seen beautiful outcomes, beautiful results from a non-traditional pathway. So Blake, listen, man, it's been great having you on. Would love to have you back at some point. Thank you for what you've done with my family and my daughters, who are like, reading your book and going, okay, I got a game plan. So thank you very much for that. And I look forward to further interactions with you in the near future. Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity, Matt. I'd love to talk again.
Good deal. Thanks, Blake. We'll talk to you soon.